Zelda is one of Nintendo's biggest series, and Zelda Breath of the Wild was a massive game when it came out, and people really seemed to like it, even if it wasn't very much like Zelda games traditionally were like. Maybe even partially because it wasn't very much like the older Zelda games. And based on the ridiculous success of Zelda Breath of the Wild, it may seem like Zelda should be open forever. But should it really? Can the Zelda series really continue to do as well as Breath of the Wild by staying open, or is the open world Zelda experience something people will start to get tired of? Would we rather have a Link who can glide, or a Link who can roll? That's really what this all comes down to. Hello all 2,390 of you, I'm Redkwan, and is open world Zelda sustainable? Now you might say, if you're a pirate who's into video games, Redwin me boy, Zelda Breath of the Wild was the largest Zelda game in sales in all time me boy. How be this a bad direction for the series me boy? Arr. And that's a very good point, and a very bad pirate voice. Zelda Breath of the Wild was the most successful Zelda game of all time in terms of sales, and it was by a lot, and it's the only Zelda game whose sales numbers are still growing. And there are plenty of reasons to think it is the best direction for Zelda going forward. There are the amazing sales, of course, but on top of that, there's also the fact that it was one of the best received Zelda games as well. Fans loved Breath of the Wild, and people spent hundreds of hours, and sometimes thousands if you were insane, which is something you probably can't say for any other Zelda game. Most of the old fans seemed to like the change and the new direction for the series, and it made a ton of new Zelda fans too, who only really know Zelda through Breath of the Wild. Most people seem happy with this direction, it was received better than just about any other Zelda, and it sold better than any other Zelda. And given that Nintendo seems to want to continue in this direction too, it's pretty tough to argue that this is the wrong approach. But tough to argue is my middle name. Red Tough to Argue Quan. But while in some ways open world Zelda seems like the best approach, there are a few things that I think may make it less sustainable than the other style of Zelda games. And I think continuing with this approach may have some risk that people get tired of it. And the reason is because I'm afraid future open Zelda games are going to be a bit too similar to Breath of the Wild. Maybe that sounds good to you, and I'm not saying that it'll be a bad game because of this, but the thing with Breath of the Wild is that it's all about exploring this massive world and finding the little secrets and quests inside it. That may be fun for a couple times, and obviously it was for a lot of people this time, and like I said, some people have spent thousands of hours in the game, so clearly they haven't gotten tired of it. But is it really going to be as fun to spend another 1,000 hours in the next game? What about the game after that, and the game after that? Is it really going to be as fun to start from scratch to explore a whole new world again? A lot of people do really just love diving into massive worlds and spending months finding everything there is to see, and for them, I'm sure this actually does sound appealing. But is that the majority of people, or even the majority of people who played Breath of the Wild? Probably not. I think a lot of people who played Breath of the Wild were so invested because it was something so new and different from anything they'd played before, and especially from what they'd experienced with Zelda. And the new experience helped them get really invested in the world. But I kinda doubt that those people will be as dedicated to finding every little thing as they were the first time. I'm not saying this necessarily will be the case, but I do think it's a possibility. And it may seem like this would have happened with the old style of Zelda games too, because they also largely followed the same structure as the previous one, and first of all, I think a lot of people were starting to get tired of them, and secondly, I think open-air Zeldas could actually have this happen much faster, because the older Zelda games only required you to play for 30 to 40 hours, compared to hundreds for a lot of people in Breath of the Wild, and the old Zeldas gave you a lot of new items in each game in addition to the new areas, which changed up both the gameplay and the setting. While I think that the next open Zelda, at least after the sequel to Breath of the Wild, which seems to be taking place in the same world as the first game, will have most of its changes be to the world, while the gameplay changes will be a lot smaller. With a similar open exploration structure, I think you'd almost have to keep things like climbing and gliding, and without items and with such a limited number of runes, I don't think you can change up nearly as much from a gameplay perspective, and you expect players to be in that setup that you can't change as much in for a lot longer time. Again, I'm sure some people will love it, but it may become a little tiresome for some Zelda fans quicker than you might think. And I know there are open world games like this that actually work out, like the Elder Scrolls, but I think the difference is that those type of games offer a lot more freedom for what your character can do, while Breath of the Wild offers a lot more freedom in where you can go. And while explorational freedom is nice, I think freedom of what you can do can keep people in a lot longer. Something like Skyrim also just has a lot more developed side quests than Breath of the Wild. I will say though, and this is a very unique opinion, Tarrytown was a pretty good side quest. Also, not to keep piling on more reasons here, but the reason the sales were so good for Breath of the Wild was probably partially due to how successful the Switch is, and how great a job Nintendo did at marketing it. I don't think future Zelda games will do as well as Breath of the Wild, no matter what style they go with. So is open world Zelda sustainable? I think for a little while at least, it probably is. I think based on how much people absolutely loved the first game and seem ready for a new game like it, it'd be hard to imagine a similar game coming out and people getting bored of it really quickly. I do think it's something to watch out for though, and I think that over time, unless Zelda makes some other big changes, people will start to get less excited and invested in open Zeldas as well. And that could be an issue, because these types of Zelda games take a lot more time than the older ones did, because of the giant world and complicated engine you have to make for them. I think after another game or two, Nintendo should definitely reevaluate whether this is the right direction, because I think at that point you might start to see people getting tired of this direction. And I don't want Nintendo going 6 years between releases if nobody even wants Zelda to be like this anymore. Will people get tired of it? I don't think for a while at least, but I could see it happening sooner than we'd think. And I'd say it's definitely something to watch out for. Now I know what you're thinking, if you're still a pirate. Arr, be that fine and dandy if you be thinking about sustainability and fan enjoyment, but what if ye be thinking about environmental sustainability, me boy? Well, given the Switch's battery of about 16 watt-hours, and the fact that the Switch battery runs out in about 2 hours of playing Breath of the Wild, if you're going full tilt, and let's say the average person plays Breath of the Wild for 100 hours, that's 16 multiplied by 100 and divided by 2, which gives us about 800 watt-hours per person. About 20 million copies of the game have been sold, which gives us about 16 billion watt-hours total, or 16 gigawatt-hours. Now according to Energy.gov, that's the equivalent of about 50 million solar panels running for an hour, or 5 solar panels running for 1,140 years. And that, my friends, isn't even factoring in the energy that goes into producing the cartridge, or the energy spent producing the game, or we get the point, me boy. Well, I'm Redkwan. Do you think open world Zelda is sustainable? What direction would you like Zelda to go in the future? Did I get my energy math right? Of course I did. I'm pretty sure. Probably. Anyways, I'm Redkwan, thank you all for watching, and I'll hopefully see you all later. Goodbye.